Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, we are talking about the best decks for new players to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, or more specifically, what you should be building towards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Now, this is obviously from a ladder perspective, what is going to give you the best chance of climbing the ladder, so climbing up to that Master rank, and all the way up to Master 1, as of right now, which is the highest rank, and what decks currently would be the best for a new player to start to pick up and to enjoy the game. So this is obviously for new players. However, this can kind of give you an understanding as to what decks are fun, what decks are going to be enjoyable to play, as well as what decks are going to be easy to build and stuff like that. So, let's start off with the newest set, that being Labyrinth. Labyrinth is interesting because it's pretty expensive right now. I believe it requires quite a few main deck URs. It requires the new selection pack, which, if we can see here, Dreaded Conspiracy, which is, has quite a few of the new cards. So, if you wanted to pull for it, it's not bad to pull for, seeing as how this is right here. And then it also has the new secret pack, which isn't exactly the greatest, seeing as how it's also filled with a whole bunch of junk, like the Destiny board archetype, which, hey, if you're interested in that, go for it. But I am going to say that it's expensive, but good. It is a little bit difficult to learn as well, which does take a little bit of time, but it's also something that you could play a very different build, instead of like the IKEA version, which is playing more of the monsters, and playing more of a trap-centric version, and it's not too difficult. But it is expensive, and that is something that you need to be aware of. However, still very good. Next up, we have Spiral. This is just not good for new players. Spiral is incredibly complex. It utilizes link monsters very commonly. It utilizes very weird combo lines that require you to basically know what most of your cards do and what cards you need to specifically get into. So it's just not very good for new players, and it's incredibly expensive. So there you go. Next up, we have Pendulum. I'm also going to put this bad for new players. Pendulum happens to be one of the most nonsensical archetypes or summoning mechanics in Yu-Gi-Oh!, as it doesn't really function similarly to any of the others. So for a new player, it just doesn't really make sense to build Pendulum if you want to play any other deck, right? Because Pendulum just works so vastly differently. And then on top of that, it's also expensive and has very similar issues as Spiral for new players. Next up, we have Drytron. I'm also going to just put it down here in bad. It has, it's a long combo deck that kind of does a million different things and isn't really all that strong as of right now. And on top of that, it's a ritual deck that doesn't really work like most other ritual decks, and it doesn't really teach you anything about the game itself, and just kind of teaches you how to combo. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily good for new players. Okay, next up we have Synchron. Synchron is expensive, but good, I would say, for new players, mostly because it is an anime deck. It's not actually good in terms of like its power level, but I do think that it is a fun deck to play, and obviously as a new player, you're probably, well, not always, but sometimes you're coming from the anime and you're like, man, I really like 5Ds, I want to play a whole bunch of Synchro monsters, I want to be Yusei, and Synchron is a great way to do that. It is a bit expensive, seeing as how it is an anime deck, but I do think that it is good in the fact that it is an anime deck, and it's pretty fun. But it is, I mean, it's not exactly like the greatest. It's very similar in nature to these. The only thing that's putting it up here is due to the fact that it is an anime deck. And hey, if you want to play an anime deck, go for it. You're not going to do very well, obviously, because most of the anime decks are pretty bad. But yeah, there you go. Next up, we have Goaty. Goaty's interesting. I'm going to put Goaty clear up here. Goaty is honestly pretty inexpensive. It does require a few URs, and I believe it's currently still in the shop, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Climax. No. It's not, right? This isn't the Goaty pack. This isn't the Goaty pack. So it is a bit expensive, seeing as how it's no longer in the shop. You just don't really have access to it. But I do think that it is still a very good deck to play and to build. Mostly because it's not too expensive. I believe I believe there's like 3 URs that you need from the actual archetype that aren't like staples that you could just, throw into any deck. And so because of that, I do think that it is pretty good. On top of that, it plays a very reactive style, so it helps you to learn how your opponent is going to play. It teaches you to read your opponent's cards. It teaches you kind of how to specifically interact with your opponent and what you're supposed to do, seeing as how it's a mid-range deck, as in it doesn't just combo, it doesn't just control, but it's more in the middle, where it kind of does a little bit of both. And so because of that, I do think that it kind of teaches you the basics of the game and how to play it. The biggest problem is that it's expensive right now because you don't have the shop to use your gems to purchase it. There's no secret pack for it or anything like that. So it is a bit expensive, but I do think that it's very good for new players. Next up, we have Blackwing. Blackwing notably has a new structure deck. So Blackwing has actually gotten significantly cheaper. So it's actually just pretty good. I'm going to put it up here. It is a long combo. Well, actually, it is just kind of a long combo deck that ends on not much. And while, yes, it was part of the anime, the difference is well, I don't know. I'm going to put it up here. I still think it's very good for new players. It's just it's not very strong, but it is very cheap. And it is an anime deck, so of course, people are going to be more interested in that if they are new players. And yeah, honestly, it is still a very good deck. It's not top tier by any means, but it is pretty good. It gives you the ability to kind of play through a myriad of different lines, to go for various different combos depending on your hand, to kind of learn how your deck works. It's a synchro deck, similar to Goaty. But yeah, I don't really know what else to say. It's also very, very inexpensive. You could just buy the 3 structure deck and then you're kind of done. So there's that. Yeah, there you go. Don't really have anything else to say about that. Next up, we have Branded. Branded is top tier, but hard to learn. It's also incredibly expensive, which makes it very problematic. Branded is a deck that realistically isn't good for new players. It's very good to just in general, but the biggest downside to it, right now, it's kind of difficult to learn. It's not exactly the most straightforward like it was previously, where it was just Mirror Jade Pass, and then you made a Guardian Chimera. Now, it's very complex. There is a lot more to do than just activate Branded Fusion, the big, fusion summon card, and then just do the one line. Now you have to go, am I going to do activate Branded Fusion, or am I going to go for Ecclesia, Cartesia, or am I going to go for Branded Lost here, or do I need to search out Branded in Red, or do I need to grab this, that, or the other thing, or the one of the Bestials, am I going to play Bestial Control, or what have you, and it's very expensive. So, while it is good, while it's very strong, I don't think it's very good for new players. Resonator is just bad. Even though it is an anime deck, I'm not even going to say it's cheap. It's not cheap. It's not good. It's just not worth it. Even compared to the other of the anime decks, it just doesn't really have enough power going for it. It kind of does one play, and it doesn't really teach you much about how other decks would play or how Yu-Gi-Oh itself interacts, because it's very basic in the way that it actually plays its game and its game plan. So I wouldn't say that it's good to learn the game. It's not really good to build. It's kind of expensive. It's not top tier. It's just not really worth it. I think how expensive is? I think Cyber Dragon is pretty cheap because it also received a structure deck in Cybernetic's successor. So similarly, it has a structure deck that you can utilize to build it pretty cheaply. And so because of that, we're going to put in cheap but bad / mid. Yes, it's another anime archetype, but it is also not very strong, all things considered. So yeah, don't really have anything else to say about that. It's cheap, but yeah, there you go. Both Blue Eyes and Dark Magician play very cool, interesting games. More so Dark Magician plays a very unique style, but of course I'm going to put them both in good for new players because they are anime decks. They are the most beloved. Everyone loves Dark Magician. Everyone loves Blue Eyes. Okay, maybe not everyone, but new players tend to flock to these for a good reason. These are very fun archetypes that are very, nostalgia filled. They're very fun to look at. They're very cool. Everyone loves Kaiba. Everyone loves Yugi. And that's okay. If you want to cosplay as them, if you want to play this game being like Yugi, that's totally A-okay. You got to know these decks are the most expensive. One of the most expensive. They're not as expensive as Heroes, which we'll get to later, but they are still very expensive and definitely something to watch out for. But yeah, they're still worthwhile to build, and if you want to build them, go for it. Next up, we have Madolche. Madolche is just not good for new players. It is incredibly complex. It is very strong, yes, but it is very complex. It is also very expensive. It's not the most expensive now because you can play like the Vernisylphs, which help facilitate the strategy without like bogging it down with a whole bunch of URs, but it's still very not worth it. So there you go. Next up, we have Dino. Dino's interesting. Dino certainly is interesting. I'm going to put it in inexpensive but good. It is definitely more expensive than things like Labyrinth. It's on the same tier of like Blue Eyes or Dark Magician. But the difference is that it is actually very strong. It does its very similar, not similar, but it does a very strong combo line. It can play going first or going second, which is very nice. It's just overall a good strategy to have, and yeah, it's just good. I don't really have anything to say. Dinos are strong. They don't have a structure deck like they did in the TCG/OCG, but they're still there. They're still good, and yeah, don't really have anything else to say. Zodiac. I'm going to put Zodiac up here in best for new players. Reason being, Zodiac is incredibly simple. It is so very simple, and it really does teach you how current modern-day Yu-Gi-Oh! Works in a very efficient manner. Zodiac is, I normal summon a guy, I XZ a whole bunch of times, which is very simple with the deck, and I make Dryden and I pass, right? And then I have a whole bunch of, like, interactive cards that, like, slow my opponent down, like for example hand traps and pseudo trap, you know, like trap cards that are kind of slow and stuff like that. So it's very basic in the way that it functions, and while it's not like the best of decks, none of these are like the best decks in terms of competitive viability, but they're really easy to build as well. Zodiac is also one of the cheapest decks to build, and it shows you the insane power of individual cards, like for example Zeus. Zeus is an absolutely insane card and the boss monster of the archetype, and while it isn't, again, it's not the most overpowered in any regard, it is also upgradable, which is unlike the other two decks, where if you build them, they're not real, they're kind of like done, you know. Zodiac can actually be paired with Tri-brigade, which we'll get to later, which means that you can actually upgrade it and continue to play it in different builds. And also you can throw it into other decks as well, which is very nice. So I do think that this is just a great investment if you want to get into like more modern stuff and more competitive stuff as well. So there you go. Next up we have Adamantipator. Adamantipator is just bad. It's expensive. It's time consuming. It's difficult to learn the combos. I'm actually gonna, you know what? I'm gonna put it in top tier but hard. Yeah, it's mostly just difficult to learn. I don't think it's too expensive. It's pseudo expensive, but a lot of the stuff that's in there that you would play that's like expensive cards are more so generic, right? So they're cards that you could put into other decks, things like Apollosa, things like Borreload Savage Dragon. These are things that throughout your time playing you'd probably be able to fit other cards into it. It's strong, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily worthwhile. Next up we have Chaos. I'm just going to ignore that one because there's another archetype that will come along that we'll talk about more in depth on that one. Next up we have Live Twin. Live Twin is a waifu deck, but it's still good to play. It's very simple in nature, but it is a bit expensive because it does require like basically all of the staples to actually play, or you could play them with Sprite, which is also a bit more expensive to play because lots of URs and stuff like that. But overall, it's still very good. It teaches you the basics of the game when it comes to link monsters and how they specifically function, which is nice. It also teaches you, like, it doesn't even necessarily teach you, but it's just, like, it's fun to play. It's a waifu deck. It's strong. It's not, like, too strong, but it's decent. Next up, we have Tri-brigade. I think just Tri-brigade is one of the best decks to pick up and learn. It's incredibly cheap. It also is in one of the best packs. I don't have it pulled up, but it's in one of the best packs in the game. That being it's like Tri-brigade and Dogmatica pack, which is phenomenal. That pack overall is just a great pack to go into. So if you're ever looking into trying to go into a pack, that one is great. The deck is pretty simple, and it does teach you unique mechanics in the game, which isn't like the greatest, but it does kind of teach you how like link monsters specifically work, which is also very good. And then, yeah, it's just a very simple deck that you can also upgrade as well. You can upgrade it with Lyrilisk, you can upgrade it with Zodiac, you can play Tri-brigade Branded, you can play Tri-brigade Punk, you can play Tri-brigade Glad Beast. Like, Tri-brigade is fantastic for new players. It's also mostly very inexpensive. I think there is one UR card that you actually need in that archetype, which is Shureg. And technically, you only need the one, especially if you're upgrading it with other archetypes as well. And the rest are very cheap. So it's very inexpensive and very good for new players. Next up, we have Mathmech. I'm going to put Mathmech up here as well. Probably above Zodiac. Mathmech specifically teaches you Cyberse monsters and how Cyberse tend to work together and pair very well together. Mathmech is very similar to Tri-brigade in a lot of the way that it functions. In fact, it's almost like a direct ripoff of Tri-brigade, except with Cyberse instead of Beast, Beast Warrior, or Winged Beast. So there you go. It's the same thing as Tri-brigade, just with Cyberse. Next up, we have Punk. Punk's interesting. Punk is interesting. I don't necessarily think that it's good for new players, but I don't want to say that it's bad. It's just kind of like middle of the road. And it's not... Well, it's kind of expensive. It doesn't really have like a... I'm going to put it in bad for new players. Punk is interesting. Punk really is just like a combo-centric deck that does very weird things, more so than like you would expect them to do, or like very different from what you would expect them to do. So you just kind of have to like know the combo, which I don't really think is good for new players. I do like decks that kind of teach you how to play the deck by just like playing the deck, and Punk doesn't really do that very efficiently. I also just think that it's very one note in the way that it plays, and it's not really too inexpensive. I think it's a bit expensive. It's not very top tier. It's kind of good, but it's not like insanely good. So it's just kind of here. It's not that bad. Like, you could definitely build it if you want to, but it's not that great. Okay, if you really, really want to commit to learning a difficult deck, Dragon Link is the way to go. If you don't know what Dragon Link is, it's basically we took a whole bunch of light and dark dragons and threw them together in a deck that focuses on link summoning out mostly Borderland, but just basically a whole bunch of dragon monsters. So if you like dragons, this is the deck for you. However, it's incredibly difficult to learn. We'll just go with that. It's non-linear in its combo lines, meaning it's not straightforward in the way that it does things. You can play through a wide branching array of different plays, all of which are good in various different situations. So it's also not like the most simple to understand as to why like people are playing specific cards and like why things come up the way that they do and yada yada. So it is kind of difficult to learn. It's probably one of the most difficult to learn, but it's very strong right now. I think it's like the 4th best deck right now in the game. And yeah, it's just very strong. So I would not suggest it, but it is very strong. And if you really want to commit to learning the game, this is a great way to do it. It teaches you basically everything about the game right now. So there's that. Next up, we have Eldritch. I'm going to say is pretty good for new players. It's a control strategy. It is pretty inexpensive. I think most of the cards are like... I think Eldritch is the only UR in there that's necessary. It's a cool archetype. I really enjoy it. It can be paired with things like regular zombie. It can be paired with more floodgates. It can be paired as like a removal tool in other such strategies. I think it's overall pretty good as a control strategy deck to just kind of learn. We have more Pendulum. I'm not gonna lie, Pendulum, Endymion in particular is so it's a lot of cards. I believe there's an Endymion structure or something like that. I don't know. This is a spellbook. I don't think Endymion's in here, but no, there's not. I mean, pendulums, right? So it's a whole bunch of that and spellbook and spell counters, which is just very difficult for new players to learn, and just difficult in general to learn. It's a lot of reading, and it's not all that good. just in general. I just don't think it's good for new players. Same with DDD, just not really good for new players. A lot of pendulums, a lot of reading, a lot of nonsense combo lines that really don't work well together and is difficult to understand. So, yeah. Next up, we have Flu. Flu is probably the best for new players. It's still good. It's still decent to play, even though it's been hit a myriad of times. The biggest problem right now is none of it is in the shop, so you can't, like, get it from a secret pack or anything like that. So you have to instead grab it from the... You just kind of, like, have to craft it, which kind of sucks. But it's not too expensive. However, it is very good. It teaches you kind of basic combos without having to rely on, like, a combo guide, like something like, not Madolce, Punk or Drytron would. But on top of that, it also has some really cool artwork. Hey, everyone likes birds. And, yeah, I don't really know what else to say. It's a nice, simple, like, resource management kind of deck. And yeah, it's just good for new players. Don't really know what else to say. I'm going to call this, like, 8-axis, which is incredibly expensive, but not... Yeah, it's just not good. It's a very different playstyle from actual, like, the rest of the decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! And the rest of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just not really worth it. Exo Sister is... I'm just going to say they're bad. They're not top tier, but they're also very expensive. They don't really do the same thing that any other deck does. They kind of rely on, like, gimmicky wins in order to actually win their games, and don't really actually rely on interact. Well, I don't know. You know what? I'll put them in expensive but good. They're expensive, but, like, they're decent. They do have a lot of things that they can do. Like, banishing and knowing what to banish is an important skill to learn, and just, like, you know, knowing what cards you should use to remove, or knowing what cards from your opponent you should remove is, like, a good skill to have. So there's that. Next up, we have Marincess. Marincess just isn't good. Just play Math Mech at that point. It kind of does similar things. Yeah, Marincess just not good for new players. Next up, we have Utopic. Utopic is expensive, but it's an anime deck. But it's also not, like, it doesn't play anywhere near, like, what the anime does. I mean, none of these really do. But even with that being said, it's Zexal, so who cares? Numeron is just also not good. It doesn't play like any other of the archetypes that we've talked about thus far. It's, again, similar to, like, 8-axis and in the way that it works. So it's just not really worth it. Next up, we have Runic, which is top tier, but hard to learn. No, in all reality, I just think this is bad to play. Runic is just not really worth it for new players. Don't really have anything else to say about it. It's just not really a good deck for new players, given, like, it's kind of a stun deck, but it's kind of not. But it's kind of expensive, but it's kind of not. It can be played in I don't know. This one's... I'm just gonna say it's bad. It's not really worth it to play. Yeah, Scareclaw. I forgot the name, sorry. Scareclaw isn't worth it. It's expensive, and it's not in any of the new packs, which makes it very difficult to actually build. And on top of that, it's just not really good. Like, it's not bad, and it'll get better. It's not great. Next up, we have Sky Striker. Yeah, Sky Striker just does its own thing. And it's not very good as well. It's also expensive. It's also not top tier. Yeah, moving on. Next up, we have Sword Soul. Sword Soul is probably the best for new players. Sword Soul specifically it's very strong, and it's very simple. It kind of does the same thing every time, and oftentimes that's enough to help you kind of learn the basics of the game. You just kind of do your thing, and then you get to read what your opponent's doing and be like, okay, so how do I get to interact with this? It's very simple lines. It's a nice Sword Soul, or it's a nice deck to build. It's easy to build. It's easy to understand. It is a bit expensive, but I believe there's a new secret pack just around the corner. So it should be less expensive now. And I think like it's what Moye Qishao and Chengying, all three of which are okay. Yeah, it's good. That's all. Tearlament is probably the best deck currently in the game. However, it is very difficult to learn. So if you want to build the best deck, go for it. This is one of the most complex decks ever in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! So good luck. I wouldn't suggest playing it. It's very difficult to know and to play, so I wouldn't suggest it. But it's definitely top tier. Hero. I understand a lot of people love Hero. But Hero is so absurdly expensive. Let me show you how expensive Hero is. Alright, so this is a quick deck that I have thrown together for Hero, and as you can see, it's very expensive. Lots of URs, lots of SRs. On top of that, it's not easy to build, because all of them are in different packs. That one's First Hero. This one's Shrouded Heroes. I believe this guy's in a different one. No. I think that I know that there's at least a third pack. This guy's not in a pack. Oh, he's in Climax of Showdown, which is in currently out. But very, very expensive, right? So if we head back over here, yeah, it's just like solely based on the amount of materials needed to build Hero optimally, and the fact that it's not a good deck, it's just not really worth it. Just not for new players. We've already talked about that one. Dragon Maid, it's very cheap. It's very cheap. It's able to be because of this structure deck. So you can actually just buy 3 of the structure deck, and you get a whole bunch of, you basically get the full Dragon Maid stuff, as well as Hieratic Seal. So it makes it not bad overall, because you do gain access to all of that stuff. And it's very cheap. It's just not good. Yeah. Next up, we have Phantom Knights. Phantom Knights are just bad. They're expensive and not good. That's all that I have to say. Next up, we have ourselves Thunder Dragons, which are pretty... Thunder Dragons are interesting. I'm gonna put them in. I'm gonna put them in cheap, but bad/mid. They're not too expensive. Well, they're not like, yeah, they're not too expensive. And they're not great by themselves. Obviously, they can be paired with other things, which makes it a lot better. But yeah, overall, they're not bad. And even though I'm putting them in bad, they're definitely more mid than they are bad. They're not necessarily like the highest of tiers, but they're still playable. They're played in like Dragon Link and stuff like that. But yeah, they're also pretty simple as well. So they're not bad to play. They're not bad to pick up. So there you go. Next up, we have Trap Trick. Trap Trick is incredibly expensive, but actually pretty good for new players. It teaches you Xyz and Links and Trap cards, which is great. But on top of that, I think that they're a very unique play style. I really don't like the artwork. I'm not a fan of the way that the artwork works. It looks very cluttered most of the time, and other reasons. But yeah, overall, not a big fan of this archetype. However, it's very good for new players. Next up, we have Dogmatica. Dogmatica is just bad. Yeah, it's a ritual deck that really doesn't work like most other ritual decks, but I guess no ritual deck does nowadays. But more importantly, it relies very heavily on like just kind of having your opponent not have the out to your monster, which means it's just not really worth it most of the time, and it's just bad in general. So there you go. Next up, we have Sprite. I'm going to put Sprite in top tier, but hard to learn. It's not, like, too difficult to learn, but there are so many different variants of Sprite, which really makes it a lot more difficult to, like, build the deck. And so because of that, not great. However, it is definitely strong, and is maybe as strong as tier, maybe better than tier. Hard to say. It might be the best deck right now in a best of one, or in the current format for ranked. So there you go. Next up, we have Dinomorphia. Dinomorphia is expensive and doesn't really teach you much about the game because it functions so very uniquely in the way that it works and with its trap cards. And it's also just a Floodgate deck, which is just not really good for new players to actually enjoy the game, I would say. So there you go. If you don't know what a Floodgate is, Floodgate basically means you stop something from your opponent, right? You Floodgate Trap Hole is a card that flips a card face down and keeps it permanently face down. So think of Floodgate as something that would stop something your opponent does permanently. And yeah, this deck basically does that. Next up, we have Rika. Rika is so incredibly difficult to learn that in no world can I recommend it for new players. So there you go. There's the list. Yeah, that's basically it. I would say, honestly, this doesn't matter too much. This is solely my own opinion. And if you want to play Resonator, go for it. If you want to play Dinomorphia, you like the artwork, you like the dinos and the trap cards, go for it. This has nothing to do with any of that. This is just, hey, here's what you might have the best success with. Here's what you might find the most enjoyment for as a new player, and what will be the easiest to pick up and to understand. Now, with that being said, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is an incredibly complex game that requires a lot of understanding. And I would suggest, if you don't understand the actual basics of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Duel Links is a good way to start, or speed duels. Speed duels are a much better way to start as well. But even with that being said, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just a complex game. It's a high learning curve, but it's so incredibly enjoyable. So stick with it, and you'll find some fun. Master Duel just happens to be pretty bad for teaching new players. I'm sorry. I wish I could do more, but hopefully this tier list helps you out. If you want more content like this, let me know. If you want to hear me explain what a new player guide, let me know down in the comments. Tell me, hey, make a new player guide. But that's going to be it for this episode. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, I like us very much, so appreciate it. And if you want to check out more content like this, as well as more Yu-Gi-Oh!, then just be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.